Now, just before Wayne comes to speak to us, we have a Bible reading. There's two Bible readings, Genesis 22, 1 to 19, and Ephesians 5, 31 to 6, verse 4. If you want to follow along, the Bible reading is there for you to see. Starting with Genesis 22. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Or what would that be in Hebrew? Aramaic? Hineni, that's right, here I am. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he'd cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God had told him about. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and he saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, "Father?" "Yes, my son," Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here," Isaac said, "but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." Abraham looked up, and there in a thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." And to this day it is said, "On the mountain of the Lord it will be provided." The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sand on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies, and through your offspring all nations on earth will be blessed because you have obeyed me." Then Abraham returned to his servants, and they set off together for Beersheba. And Abraham stayed in Beersheba. Ephesians 5, verse 31 to 6, verse 4. "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the 2 will become one flesh. This is a profound mystery, but I am talking about Christ and the church. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord."
It's appropriate to be speaking about parenting this morning because we had these children dedicated to the Lord. And for those who are guests amongst us this morning, just to give you a bit of a background, that this year, throughout the whole year, we've been focusing on this theme of cruciform living and being conformed to be like Jesus. And so far we are in a cruciform living series that we've looked at the word surrender, what that means. We've looked last week at war on the inside, and this morning we're looking at parenting. And parenting perspective is important. And I saw this week and I thought I'd use it as my opening. There is a 0.02% probability your child becomes a professional athlete. There's a 100% probability your child stands before, it's not 100% probability, 100% reality, your child stands before Jesus, the Lord of heaven and earth. So which do you prioritise? And even if you're not a parent, if you're a young adult or a teenager here this morning, the numbers are still the same. There's 100% for all of us that will get to stand before Jesus. And so let me give you a bit of a mind map of where I plan to go this morning, because some people like mind maps. And I know it's not a very, very visually graphic mind map. It's just 5 things. We're going to talk about some Bible claims. I'm going to make some pastoral comments, and I'm going to talk some history. Then I'm going to do practices for marriage and parenting, and then I'm going to ask you the question, what will you do? So that's where we're going this morning. And I want to say at the beginning, parenting is a tough gig. So all of you parents and grandparents is a tough gig as well. So this morning I was reminded as we were leaving the house, we've been looking after 2 of our grandchildren over the weekend. It's been delightful. I was reminded of a Michael McIntyre skit, and some of you may have seen it. Michael McIntyre, for those people who don't know, is a British comedian. And he does this great skit about when you don't have children, you say to your wife or your husband, let's leave the house. And you leave the house. When you have children, it's a planned event. So let's just say it was staged chaos in our house leaving this morning. We looked at the time, we went, do we go now? You know, because when we get there, we've got to occupy the kids until everything starts. But what we didn't factor in was it was going to take us another 10 minutes to actually leave, be in the cars and leave. Anyway, we made it here. We made it on time, so it's all. But interesting. So just to say, parents, it's a tough gig, and particularly when your children are small, but even as they grow up, sometimes it doesn't get any easier, and you face more and more challenges. Okay, let's look at some Bible claims to begin with this morning. Thank you very much. All right, this is just simple stuff, and I want to say this again, just to make sure everyone's on the same page, rather than assume everyone knows and understands things. So the Bible tells us several things. It tells us there's only one God. It tells us that God created everything that exists. It tells us that humans uniquely bear God's image. Out of all that God created, humans occupy a particular and a special, unique place in that reality. We're the ones who are described in the Bible as the ones who bear God's image and likeness. God defines what's good and evil, and when humans reject God and define morality, we defile ourselves and we destroy God's world. And that would be the big answer to the question, why is the world in such a mess? But the great hope is that God commands everyone to stop rebelling, turn to him and learn how to behave in the household of God. And when we do that, he receives us back into his family, in our home. We become heirs again. All our rights and privileges are restored in that way. So there's some things that the Bible says. Now let me make some pastoral comments. I know we've got a mixed audience here today, as we do every week, and some of you have been disciples of Jesus for many years. Some are first-generation Christians. You're working out how to undo the damaging effects of your own rebellion against God, and that's a difficult process at times. But some of you are here today because you're Jesus curious and you're wanting to find out more about Jesus. Some of you are single, some are married, some are divorced. Some are parents, some aren't. Some families are peaceful and some families are conflicted. So in all of that, we want to say that the Bible has a lot of wisdom about parenting. That might be new information for some of you. It's actually got a lot of wisdom about parenting, including some things not to do. But this morning we'll focus more on the positives. And I know that a biblical message about parenting will evoke a range of emotions, including shame and guilt. And I want you to hear up front that I understand that. So as we go through the rest of it, I won't have time to stop and deal with that. I'm trying to deal with it all the way up front to say, yeah, I understand that for some people it will bring up shame and guilt. But I also want to say, don't give up. If that's where you're at today, as a parent, don't give up. But do ask God to conform you to Christ and to help you parent your children according to his wisdom. Now, I want to move on and talk briefly about some history. Now, we were born into a social engineering experiment no one told us about. How many of you were aware of that? You were born into a social engineering experiment no one told you about. Well, now you do. I'm telling you. You were born into a social experiment that no one told you about. And that's a problem. It would have been more helpful. When people say to you, I want you to be part of an experiment, you pay attention, don't you? You kind of go, oh, okay, I'm part of an experiment. But when you're just born, and you're born into something that is a social experiment and no one tells you about it, you don't actually realise what's going on behind the scenes. And the reality is that the Bible tells us that we were born into this unrelenting war against God and biblical foundations for a flourishing society. So I made statements about God created everything that exists. And God set up conditions for humans to flourish, for humans to be healthy in every sense of what that means, and for society to be healthy. But because we said no to God's standards, God's definitions of morality, and we said, no, God, we will make up our own definitions, we have made a complete mess of things. Now, last week, when we looked at Cruciform Living number 2, that was a message brought by Nathan. He talked about this war on the inside, and he talked about the fact that in our culture, people want the values of the kingdom of heaven, but they don't want the king of heaven. Some of you might remember that statement. It's a really important thing to understand. People, if you say to people, do you want a flourishing, healthy society? Most people say yes. I'm yet to meet someone that says, no, look, I prefer dysfunction, disorder, and chaos. But the thing is, when you want the values of the kingdom without the king, you don't get it, because you only get it with the king. Let me give you quick examples. Can't develop these in any detail this morning, but just to throw out part of this social engineering experiment that we're all part of. The theory of evolution. We are all born into the era where the theory of evolution, and it is a theory, it's a theory that life came from non-life. Now that is a huge leap of faith. That life came from what was not life. That's a chasm to cross. And what the theory of evolution did, it destroyed human identity. Because it undercut and pulled out the biblical foundation that all human beings are God's bearers of his image. Every human being is made in God's image and likeness and has value and worth simply based on that. We aren't just another animal. That the theory of evolution has taught all of our generations and is still teaching the generations that they are animals, and then they're wondering why children are growing up and behaving like animals. Another example. We rejected God's wisdom for marriage and families. Some of you are old enough to remember the 50s and the 60s, where sex was permanently severed from marriage. It was permanently severed from marriage. Contraception was introduced that severed sex from the sacred duty of parenthood and created a child-killing culture that murders millions of babies, unborn and some born as well, because we rejected God's wisdom for marriage and families, that sex belongs in a monogamous marriage between a man and a woman. Another example is pornography. Pornography continues corrupting people and relationships in horrific ways. Now, we're all born into this, and we're in different stages of this in terms of how that's playing out in our lives. But see, part of what our government is trying to deal with, without actually returning to God, is how do you deal with this, some of these things. But we want God. So we want the values of the kingdom, but we don't want God. So how are we going to do this? So then they've got to pass all sorts of legislation to try to do this. And any parent and most of the teenagers in the room there's now what's called consent education, because pornography has destroyed any idea of what it means to be in a committed relationship of marriage. So we're all born into the social engineering experiments that I've had. But the great news is, from a Christian perspective, God never abandoned us. We might have abandoned God, but God never abandoned humanity, and that is really good news, because it means we have got somewhere to go home to. When we come to our senses, we can go, I want to go back to God. What God began, and this is bringing biblical information, God began a global redemption project by choosing Abraham and making a covenant with him. And then God continued to renew that covenant with Abraham's descendants, his son Isaac, and then later Jacob, who became Israel and lived with his family in the land of Israel. And then God made a new covenant with Israel through Jesus of Nazareth, who is the crucified and resurrected Lord, and we sang beautiful songs about that reality earlier today. So God's still at work. God's never abandoned the world. He's never left us. He's still redeeming the world. He's redeeming marriages and families, and he can redeem your marriage and your family. And many of you are sitting here this morning as testimony to that reality, or at least testimony to the longing to say, God, I want you to redeem my family. So we want to talk about some practices for marriage and parenting. It's important to understand that from a biblical perspective, marriage and parenting is built on, I call it a covenant reality. The covenant reality. There's marriage covenant and parent covenant. Let me tell you a story that I think might help you understand something about covenant from a biblical perspective. Now, I saw a man I never met tell this story. His name is Rabbi David Aaron. And he says that one night he was at home with his wife and he turned to her name's Shanna, and he said he was feeling really self-confident in this moment. Why do you love me? Don't know if maybe there isn't any husbands in this room that have ever turned to their wife and said, why do you love me? Now, here's what she said to him. She said, I have no reason to love you. And he said to her, you mean you can't find one reason to love me? She said to him, not only do I have no reason to love you, but you would also not want me to have a reason to love you. He said, yeah, I think I would. And she said, no, you wouldn't. Because if I had a reason to love you, it would be the reason I love you and not you. And if that reason were no longer relevant, what would happen to my love? She went on and she said, I love you for no reason, and I love you even when you give me reasons not to love you. That right there is a little snapshot of God's covenants and God's covenant love and what we are called into. And Paul, in his letter to the Ephesians, chapter 5, that was read to you earlier, he summed that up in that way. That covenant marriage is a choice to love for no reason. And it's even a choice to love you when you give me reasons not to love you. Covenant is an anchor and a security for marriage and parenting. Now, there's people in this room that want to get married. You're going to have to close the back door because you're growing up in a culture where divorce is an option. And every time people go into marriage thinking divorce is an option if it doesn't work out, they hit tough times and they don't know what to do. You need a covenant relationship, and that has to come from both parties. Both have to have a choice to love the other for no reason. I mean, you do want to be attracted to one another, but you don't want to have a reason, because then you can love the reason and not the person. So I want to ask some serious questions. For people who are married, have you entered God's covenant of marriage? Is your marriage a covenant marriage? But let me back that up, because first of all, you want to say, have you entered God's covenant through Jesus Christ? Have you submitted your life to Jesus Christ because he is the Lord of heaven and earth? That's the first covenant you want to get into before you try to have a marriage covenant or before you try to have a parenting covenant. You go, I got to be in that covenant, God's covenant, because then he will teach me how to live in the other covenants. But this is so important for you to be anchored in the love of God. That God is committed to love you. He's not committed to love you based on your performance, based on your good deeds. It's got nothing to do with it. The cross is the message, I love you for no reason. And I love you when you give me reasons not to love you, of which you have given God plenty and I have given God plenty. But the message of the cross of Christ crucified is God's message to us, I have chosen to love you. And there's a power in that. There's a security in that can't be taken away. Because we're all doing things most days that we know are not pleasing to God. And if our acceptance by God was based on our performance, we get really shaky. Am I in? Am I out? And it gets very shaky. You want to be anchored in him. This is what he said. He said, I love you because I chose to love you. You've not given me any reason, God says, to love you. I've chosen to love you. And there's a richness and a security in that. And I'm so grateful to have a covenant wife that loves me for no reason and loves me even when I give her reasons not to love me. And when our sons were young, we would tell them something along these lines, particularly when they were misbehaving. I know that's hard for some of you to believe because you know them as adults. But it was true. But we would tell them that when we were disciplining them, that we loved them before they were conceived. I remember when I think I said this to Julie. I said to her, we've been married for a couple of years, and I said, do you want to go halves in a baby? All the women are going, yeah, right. But we said to the boys, we decided to love you before you were born. Before you were conceived, we decided to love you. And your behaviour doesn't change that. It might change whether we like you and enjoy being around you, but love is secure. You are secure, and we want you to be secure in our love. And then we've continued that on to be still true today with our daughters-in-law and our grandchildren. We keep telling them the same message. We have chosen to love you because we have. It's not based on your performance. Okay, so let's move on and talk about 5 practices for marriage. Now, these are all going to pop up on the screen in one go. You're probably not going to hear anything I say for a couple of minutes, but we can't afford the silence. So 5 practices for marriage. Here we go. Prioritise God without neglecting your spouse. Protect your marriage from predators. Provide financially, food, clothing and shelter. Partner with God to propel your spouse to become who God created them to be. Participate in a Christian community. Got it? Nailed it? Okay. Let me say a couple of comments. Now, some of these repeat when we get to children and parenting. So, not all of them, but some do. Number 1, prioritise God without neglecting your spouse. You see, the thing is, your life will be in godly order if you love God first. The Bible says that. Love God with all your heart, soul, mind and strength. And the problem with all of us is we have disordered loves. We love things in the wrong order. And sometimes we love things we shouldn't love at all. So, but when we put them in God's order, which means I have to love God more than my wife loves me, loves God more than me, and that's difficult at times. It's difficult as a man to know I'm always going to be second. I want to be numero uno, I want to be the top of the tree. But I've never been. In the 41 plus years that we've been married, but I wouldn't actually want it any other way, because our marriage would not be stable without it. So you've got to prioritise God without neglecting your spouse. My wife has never neglected me, but she's always been very clear. Her number 1 priority is God. Okay, protect your marriage from predators. The predators come in all forms into marriages. Sometimes they come in the form of someone else not respecting that you are in a marriage covenant, and so they try to steal you away, or you can actually get lured away by your own seductions, things. But there's all sorts of things. There's all sorts of predators that you've got to protect your marriage from. I mean, 41 years ago, no one said you had to protect your marriage from video games. But maybe today you do. But there's all sorts of things that are predators in society, and some of the predators are in our own hearts that we've got to protect our marriage from. The writer to Hebrews, 13th chapter, 4th verse, he says, marriage should be honoured by all. But the fact is, not everyone in our culture honours marriage. There are some people that a wedding ring means nothing to them. They still think you're on the market, so to speak. They still think you're available. It's like, no, covenant relationship here, not available. But if someone comes on to you, you've got to draw a line. Protect your marriage from predators. Provide financially, food, clothing and shelter. Now, some of you know our story. And there was many times I was reflecting on this as I was preparing this week. God has always provided all that we've needed in food, clothing and shelter. But there was plenty of periods of time and we're a single income family, where I felt that I was failing as a husband because I thought I should be making more money than I was. And so I thought I should perhaps get a second job and work it around being a full-time pastor, which was never going to happen. And at times I actually thought about leaving pastoral ministry and taking a higher paying job to give my family more of what I felt obliged to give them. They weren't asking. My wife wasn't asking for more. She was not asking for more jewelry. She was not asking for anything. It was internal for me. It was a wrestle I had to resolve with God. And by his grace, when he invited us to sell everything and move to another country, it helped break that. So, but you do got to provide financially. And you do got to partner with God to propel your spouse to become who God created them to be. It's the most important thing you can ask, actually. Who'd God create my spouse to be? And how do I partner with God to help them become that? Such an important thing to do. And if you're not married and you're looking for a marriage partner, you want someone who's going to do that with you, who's going to help propel you to become who God created you to be, not who they want you to be. If you've got to conform yourself to someone else's ideas, that's the wrong person to be married to. And you want to run from that person as far away as you possibly can. So 5 practices for marriage. We could say a lot more on those. I will actually say more about that. One of the ways you can protect your marriage from predators, and this sets yourself up for long-term strength and stability, is once you get married, you have to keep dating your spouse. You have to keep dating them. I think a weekly date is good. But sometimes you might not be able to do that. When our boys were small, we weren't able to do that. As they grew up and they're at school and those things, you begin to do that. But the idea is, this is one of the ways you protect your marriage from predators, is by actually being together in a dating situation, a one-on-one situation, just as you were pre-kids and right? And you're in there and you're actually investing and you're talking about the things that matter. It might be a simple meal. It doesn't have to be a 5-star dining experience. We're not talking about that. But it's a sitting down together and talking about what really matters, what's going on in your hearts and lives. Where do we want to go? All of these kind of things. So one of the ways you protect your marriage from predators is continuing to date. And some of you haven't dated for decades, and you need to relearn how to do that with your spouse. And I encourage you to do that this morning. And you need to participate in a Christian community, because the reason you need to participate in a Christian community is because God's word tells us to do that, and because you can't make it alone. You need people around you, keep pushing you, keep reminding you. Younger couples in this congregation often talk to me about the encouragement they get from seeing older, longer married couples who've gone through some of the storms that they're going through right now. And so there's this cascading effect. So the older ones amongst us, thank you for being faithful to your marriage vows in this context, because you're showing something about the value. You're reminding the people of what it means. Okay, 6 practices now for parenting. Like I said, some of these do overlap. All right. Prioritise God without neglecting your spouse or children. Prioritise your marriage before your children. Protect but do not possess or idolise your children. I'm going to spend a bit of time on that one in a moment. Provide what they need, not what they want. Partner with God to propel your children to become who God created them to be, and participate in Christian community. Okay. Same things apply about prioritising God without neglecting your spouse or your children. It's an important thing to do. Difficult. It's difficult when your kids are small. The ankle biters, all that kind of thing, whatever language you like to use. You know, to find time to be with Jesus. But it's so important that you do keep fighting, wrestling, finding some time to be with Jesus. Susanna Wesley was the mother of John and Charles Wesley. Some of you don't know who they are. That's okay. You can find out by searching their names out. They were significant men of God. But I think Suzanne had about 12 children in England yeah, I heard that. Yep. It's reported that her signal to her children that she was spending time with God, she would sit at the kitchen table with her Bible and she would put her apron over her head, which meant she's talking to God and she's not available to the kids, right? That was her way of doing it. So you find a way to do this. And it's important for your children to see you spending time with Jesus and for them knowing that's your time with Jesus. Of course, you tend to their needs as they are, but they also got to go, hey, this is time with Jesus. So, and you prioritise your marriage before your children as well. One of the most important things you can do as a couple is sit together on the couch and talk about the day and have the children learn to leave you alone while you do that. They need to see mum and dad having conversations. They need to learn that mum and dad's relationship is a higher priority than them. That actually creates a lot of insecurity. Going to talk about that in a minute. I'll go down to number 4. Provide what they want, what they need, not what they want. Sorry, provide what they need, not what they want. Don't get that the wrong way around. We all want a lot of things. And like I say, we're in a social engineering experiment which all the time is exploding the options and the choices and what there are so many things. You sometimes go on websites looking for something and you find all these other things you didn't know you needed. It's like men going to Bunnings and women going to Bunnings, and you come home with all this stuff you didn't even know it existed until you went in there. So there's all this stuff about what's going on there that we want to keep. We want to keep a restraint. It's what we need, not what we want. And you want to partner with God to prepare your child to become who God created them to be. I'll just simply say that this is such an important thing as a parent. It's like, we need to know who God created this child to be. And the thing about it is, you got more than one child, you quickly realise God doesn't use cookie cutters. When he produces children, they come out of the same genetic pond, but they're very different. And the more children you have, the more variations you get in behaviour and temperament and all these other things. So the question for every single parent, this is a serious thing. It's like, God, help me to discern who you created this child to be. And as our boys were growing up, that was the question that we were asking. That was the prayer that we were praying. And we began to notice certain things. One would gravitate to a certain activity, a different one would gravitate to a different activity. And we began to see and understand that they were both going to serve God, but it was actually going to be in different spheres. And they are both serving God in different spheres. So we'll just leave it at that and keep moving on, because I want to spend a bit of time on number 3. Protect but do not possess or idolise your children. This one. This is really important. Rabbi Sachs says the binding of Isaac in Genesis 22 is actually a polemic against and a rejection of the universal principle of patria potestas, which is the universal idea in all pagan cultures that children are the property of their parents. So Rabbi Sachs is saying that this is actually severing that. In Abraham's mind, the child, you have not withheld your child from me. The child belongs to God, not you. Now that is still strong in cultures today, right? If any of you know anything about the Islamic community, this is still strong in there. Fathers can kill their children And they do kill their children if they believe they've brought dishonour. And they consider it their duty and right to do so. Because the children belong to them. The children is not separate to them in this way. So one of the things that's going on, there's multi-layers in the Abraham story there, but I just wanted to focus on this one. It's actually a polemic against the fact that the child is your property. They are not your property, they are God's property. So you don't want to possess them in that way, but nor do you want to idolise them as well. You shouldn't let, I love what Jordan Peterson said, don't let children behave in ways that make you or anyone else dislike them. I think that's a pretty simple phrase, really, you know, because how you let them behave when they're small, if you don't check that, they're going to grow up, keep doing that kind of thing, and then it's going to be very ugly for everybody. So you want to nip those things in the bud. So, and we're in a culture that has idolised children, which has given them a status that they shouldn't deserve. Children are not small adults. They cannot process emotional information that's beyond their years. And some parents are actually terrorising or abusing their children by having adult conversations in front of their children, thinking that they're just small adults. There are parents who want their children to be their best friend. That's wrong. You want to invest in the relationship so that when your child is an adult, they're a good friend. But if you tell your child, your small child, they are your best friend, there's a distortion you've introduced into the relationship that's unhealthy and will destroy them. Lots of parents are so preoccupied with, I want to protect my child so that they never end up in therapy, are actually the ones who drive their children to therapy. When you protect your child, you are inevitably setting them up for the need for therapy. So there's different phrases that have gone around. There was helicopter parenting a few years ago where parents hovering around their children all the time, right? Now there's lawnmower parents. They just bulldoze everything out of the way of their kids, you know? There's memes that you've seen and, when I went to school, I got in trouble. Right? My parents would be called to the principal's office and I was responsible for my actions. And the principal enforced that to me and to my parents. Nowadays, often kids get in trouble. Parents are called to the principal's office and they blame the principal and the school for how their child is behaving. And the child's not responsible and all these kinds of things. No, teach your children to be responsible. Don't let them behave in ways that make you dislike them or anyone else dislike them. Okay, that's enough controversy for this morning. So, remember at the beginning, I said this is our mind map. So we're at the tail end now. What will you do? And so I've got 3 questions to wrap up with. If you've not surrendered your life to the Lord Jesus Christ, will you do that today? But is there one of those marriage practices you need to begin or resume? And is there a parenting practice you need to begin or resume? And so my question is, what will you do? Will you pray with me and the worship team will come up and close with a song and then we'll have morning tea together. But I invite you to pray with me, close your eyes and bow your heads. And if you've never surrendered your life to the Lord Jesus Christ today, just speak that out. Just say, Lord Jesus Christ, today I surrender myself completely to you. Teach me what it means to follow you, to love you and to obey you. And God, I thank you I want to thank you for covenant reality. God, we've not given you any reason to love us. We've given you plenty of reasons not to love us. But the cross of Jesus Christ tells us and secures us in that reality that you have chosen to love us. So, Father, my prayer is for every single person in this room and any who watch this stream to become ones who are secure in your covenant love and are therefore able to give that same security of covenant love to their spouse and to their children. So help us, O God, I pray, for your honour and your glory. Amen. Let's stand together to close.